You've finished a draft, a submission, an advice memo, a board paper. You're not sure about it. Something is off, but you can't name it. So you paste it into Claude and ask, "What do you think?" Claude says it's excellent, strong arguments, clear structure, good use of authority, maybe some minor suggestions for refinement. Your gut says it isn't excellent, and your gut is usually right. The problem isn't your draft. The problem is the prompt. This is Foundations Episode 3, 4 moves that turn Claude from a flattering assistant into the honest critic your draft actually needs. Worked through written submissions, but the same protocol applies to advice memos, opinion drafts, board papers, and any writing that has to land on a critical reader. First, the problem. Claude is trained to be helpful. The default behavior is to be agreeable, to find what works in your draft and praise it, to soften the negative, to frame criticism as suggestion. This is a great start. You might consider means almost nothing. For most uses of Claude, helpful is the right default. For evaluating your own work, helpful is exactly the wrong default. Most legal drafts arrive with real problems, buried conclusions, missing authority, weak ordering, unguarded concessions. The default mode misses them because the default mode isn't looking for them. You don't need a tool that praises your work. You need one that finds what's wrong with it. Getting Claude into the right mode is a 4-move shift. Same source, different workflow. Episode 5 used Hilary Gridley's first workflow, reverse engineering your judgment to evaluate other people's work. This episode uses her second, same author, same methodology, applied inwards rather than outwards. How to make Claude evaluate your own drafts as harshly as you would. We're walking through it as Hilary described it, then translating it for written submissions. Submissions are the cleanest example because they have a defined critical reader, the judge, opposing counsel, the bench you're trying to persuade. The same protocol applies to any work that has to land on someone who's looking for problems. 4 moves to make Claude your honest critic. Move 1. Define the reader. Tell Claude exactly who is going to read this and what they're looking for. The more specific the reader, the more specific the feedback. Move 2. Set the standard. Anchor the criteria explicitly. No, is it good? Always, does it satisfy these criteria? Specific criteria in the prompt produce actionable evaluation. Move 3. Demand the worst case. Force Claude to find the weakest argument, the worst written paragraph, the most exposed flank. Open-ended find issues is the default. Targeted weakness finding is a specific instruction. Move 4. Role-play the opponent. The strongest critic is the person who wants you to lose. Putting Claude in opposing counsel's chair shifts the entire response. The 4 moves work alone, and they work better together. We'll walk through each, then combine them in a single prompt at the end. Move 1. Define the reader. Specifically. Critique my submission gives you a generic critique. Critique my submission as if you were a federal court judge with limited time who has read the pleadings and who is skeptical of the third argument, gives you something usable. The more specific the reader, the more specific the feedback. A federal court judge reads differently from a tribunal member. A senior partner reviews differently from a regulator. A board chair reads differently from a CFO. Tell Claude exactly who you're writing for, what their priorities are, and what they're skeptical about. The feedback narrows accordingly. This is the move that costs the least and changes the most. 5 extra words in your prompt produce dramatically more useful output. Move 2. Set the standard. Make it explicit. Don't ask, "Is this good?" Ask whether it meets specific criteria. Is the conclusion stated in the first paragraph? Is each authority cited with the proposition it supports? Does the strongest argument come first? Is any factual concession unguarded? Claude evaluating against named criteria gives you actionable feedback. Claude evaluating against good gives you encouragement. If you built the memo doctor in episode 5, you already have a set of criteria you've articulated for your own work. Borrow that rubric. Drop it into this prompt. The criteria you developed for evaluating your team's drafts are the same criteria you should be applying to your own. Move 3. Demand the worst case. What is the weakest argument in this submission? Which paragraph is the worst written? Where am I most exposed? If you had to identify 3 things that would lose this case, what would they be? Claude will find them, but only if you make it look. The default behavior is to balance positive and negative observations. Asking for the worst forces ranking. Ranking forces specificity. Specificity is what you need. If your draft has 5 problems, you don't want a list of 5 neutrally described observations. You want to know which 2 are actually going to hurt you. The worst framing produces that ranking. The default framing produces a balanced list that wastes your time. Move 4. Role-play the opponent. This is the single most powerful prompt move. You are opposing counsel. Read this submission and tell me how you'd attack it. Claude shifts mode entirely. The agreeable assistant becomes the adversarial reader you needed all along. It picks up on weaknesses you couldn't see because you wrote the thing. It identifies attack lines from positions you didn't realize you'd left open. Run this last after the other moves. The earlier moves prime the criteria. The opponent roleplay applies them through the mind of someone who wants you to fail. The combination is brutal in a way that's much more useful than the default. The strongest critic is the person who wants you to lose. Most of the time, you don't have access to that person. With this prompt move, you do. All 4 moves in one prompt. Attached is your draft submission. You tell Claude to adopt the persona of opposing counsel reading it for the first time, with a client who wants every weakness found. You list the criteria explicitly. Is the strongest argument first? Is each authority cited with the proposition it supports? Is the conclusion stated rather than buried? Is any factual concession unguarded? Then the worst case framing. What is the weakest argument? Which paragraph is worst written? Where are you most exposed? Be specific. Quote the language. Adapt the criteria for your work. Submissions need different criteria from advice memos, which need different criteria from board papers. Keep the 4 moves intact. The structure is the protocol. The criteria flex. The protocol doesn't. One important caveat before we close. This protocol doesn't replace a second pair of human eyes. Don't substitute Claude for the colleague reading your draft over the weekend, the senior partner you trust to be honest with you, the friend who'll tell you the 3rd paragraph isn't working. Human readers catch things Claude doesn't, particularly tonal issues and audience-specific subtleties. What this protocol does is get the obvious problems caught before they leave your laptop. The cleaner draft is what goes to the human reader. Their time is better spent on the things only they can find. Your time is better spent fixing the problems Claude already flagged before anyone else has to see them. Use Claude to clean the draft. Use the human to validate it. Don't reverse the order. The flattery is the default. Most lawyers will use Claude for the rest of their careers without ever asking it to be properly critical. They will get drafts back that are almost as good as they could be, never as good as they should be. The drafts will land in front of judges, regulators, partners, and opposing counsel with weaknesses that should have been caught and weren't. 4 moves. Use together. Run them on every draft that matters. The protocol takes 30 seconds longer to set up. It catches problems that would have cost you hours, or worse, the matter. Coming next, reading the impossible document. How to use Claude on the brief that's 600 pages of expert reports, contemporaneous emails, and exhibits. When you have the weekend to absorb it, subscribe so you don't miss it. That's the episode. See you in the next one.